I've been working on a side-scrolling action roguelite for the Playdate. Last week, I finally added an enemy to the game, the wolf, and now it's time to add new enemies. But before I started working on anything, I've been posting updates on the game to Twitter, and no joke, on almost every single post, this guy named Jorg has been telling me that I should add a spin attack that's controlled by the crank. Someone else also left a comment about a spin attack on my last video. I was initially hesitant since I used an asset pack for the player animations, and there's no spin animation. So that means I would have to hand draw the attack myself in the same style. But I was also thinking of adding it too, so I just bit the bullet and took some time to draw it myself. I think it turned out great, so I added it into the game. When you crank, it brings you into the spinning state. Currently, you just spin indefinitely and you can't move. So I changed it so that you can move while spinning at a slower speed. And also you return to an idle state when you stop spinning. It was feeling really fun already, like I was a human Beyblade. My next task was to add some hitboxes to the spin attack, which is pretty simple with the hitbox system I created already. I created a short hitbox on each side as a sword passes by. I tested it out on the wolves, and there was something just so satisfying about spinning into enemies and dealing massive damage. I had the idea to reverse the direction that you're spinning based on the direction you're spinning the crank. But I realized that I couldn't just reverse the animation. I would need to draw a completely new animation in the opposite direction. So I just scrapped the idea since I wasn't about to go through that again. While testing the attack, I felt like it was pretty overpowered, so I decided to add this little meter that depletes when you use the attack. Once the meter gets used up, it needs to refill before you can use it again. This was already going a long way to balancing the attack, but I'll probably adjust it some more, like making the meter regenerate after a bit of time and changing how it looks. Since this is a roguelike, I'll be adding a shop to the game, and this will probably be an ability you can unlock and upgrade. Last week, when I added the wolf, I actually created a generic AI that allows me to easily create new enemy types while just changing the stats, like attack damage, speed, attack speed, the ability to get stunned, and more. The asset pack I used for the enemies had 4 other creatures, so that's right, I'm going to add 4 entirely new enemies to the game. The first is the rat, which I made pretty similar to the wolf, except it has less health. The second one is the ghost, which has this weird body flash attack. I made it take some knockback, but I might change that later since it kinda makes sense for the ghost not to take any knockback. Third, I made a small worm creature that's pretty weak, but it's smaller and harder to catch. The last one is a minotaur, who has a lot of health in this slow, powerful attack. It also doesn't take any hit stun or knockback at all, which makes it really dangerous. This is just the beginning. I'll be adding a bunch more enemies that will appear in different areas. And by different areas, I mean I'm just switching out the background. As a roguelite, my plan was to have the player traverse across a randomly generated map, and at each location, the player would enter the battle scene and fight waves of enemies. And once all the waves were defeated, the player would move on. The first step for that was to fix the edge of the world. I locked the camera in place and added a limit on how far the player could go. Next, I wanted some sort of effect for when I spawned the enemies in. I had this idea for these beams coming down from the sky, which is actually just a rectangle I animated using math. I then made it so it would spawn a random enemy in when the beam came down. Something was just slightly off with the look of the beam, so I added a black border to it, and I think that made it look a lot better. I then added a simple wave system, which spawns in enemies and keeps track of how many you kill. In the final version, I'll control the difficulty of the enemy spawning based on where you are on the map and have a wave limit. But I've been releasing these builds of my game every week for my Patreon supporters, and I wanted to have the build somewhat playable, kind of like a minigame, so I made the waves infinite. One thing that was missing was a death state, so I added in the death animation when the player's health reaches 0. Then I added in scene transitions and added this temporary results screen to show the max wave you reached. This won't be in the final game, but as a Patreon supporter, you can get access to this build today and spin attack enemies with a crank in the meantime, while I work on finishing the main gameplay loop, along with helping me with valuable player feedback. Next week, I'll be adding the map and shop as well, so I'll need some ideas for what kind of upgrades the player can buy. I want things that will change the player's playstyle, like an item that makes backstabs do more damage, so the player is incentivized to go behind and attack, or an item that makes rolls leave damaging spikes, so the roll can be used offensively. Let me know if you have any ideas in the comments, and see you next time.